Glad to be with Ray Pritchard here of Keep Believing Ministries. Ray is someone that I have known of for several years, that I have read and listened to preach and followed. But this is the first day that we've connected. I was going to say face-to-face, sort of face-to-face, face-to-face through a screen. But thank you for taking some time to be with me today.
Michael, it's a great joy. I enjoyed being with you and your staff just a few minutes ago, your wonderful ministry. So thank you for inviting me to be with you today.
You bet. So let's spend a few minutes talking about what both of us love to talk about, and that's preaching. The Lord's
my favorite topic.
Absolutely. The Lord's put on our heart to, it's funny, preachers are funny. We love to preach. We love to talk about preaching. We usually love to hear preaching. And so the Lord's just kind of put that in our heart. But you've been preaching for how long? You said you were 71 right now?
Right, 71.
And nobody believes that. You look way too good to be 71. There, did I do it right that time?
Thank you, Michael. Thank you. I've been preaching for 50 years plus, okay, I guess, and I've been preaching that long, and I've been listening to preaching longer than that. Right.
So let's talk for. Go ahead.
No, I was just going to ask, what's your first question?
Yeah. So let's talk in terms of preaching. In your mind, as you think about whether it's for you or for anyone, what makes good preaching? Understanding there's different styles, different personalities, different strengths, but what are some things that you would say, regardless of the situation, what makes a good sermon or what makes for good preaching?
You know, a while back, I was rereading Charles Spurgeon's lectures to my students.
Yeah.
A book. Warren Wiersbe said, you know, this is a classic, pastors ought to read it every year. Yeah. And I agree on that. He's got a chapter in there on earnestness. You can read homiletical textbooks, Michael. You don't see a lot about earnestness in the ministry in a preaching context. And even when you say that, it may seem to give an idea of sternness or hardness or how loud you are or whether you wave your arms around. It's nothing to do with that. It's to have your whole heart into it. Mm-hmm. I will listen to any man whose whole heart is into it. Mm-hmm. And usually within 30 seconds, you can tell whether a preacher is preaching because it's his job and it's Sunday morning, or if he has brought his whole heart into it. He may start with a little story. He might even start with a joke. It doesn't matter. That's not the emphasis. But his very being and demeanor lets you know, I'm here with a message from God. People are dying out there. Yeah. This world is dying. When anybody listens to a sermon, they want to hear the absolute true word of God. So above everything else, I mean, I remember sitting and listening to the great E.V. Hill, the great black pastor from Los Angeles. He could preach. E.V. could preach down the stars, and he was a great preacher in the historic black homiletical tradition. But I'll tell you this much: every time I listened to him, I never doubted his sincerity, and I knew, and he could tell a story and weave a word picture like nobody I've ever heard. But I never doubted that he was completely in earnest. Look, John MacArthur's a completely different kind of preacher. Chuck Swindoll, a different kind of preacher. John Piper, different kind of preacher. Alistair Begg, my buddy H.B. Charles Jr. H.B. and I are very good friends down there in Jacksonville. Yeah. And I know he's been out there to preach for Dr. MacArthur a number of times. And H.B. has his own kind of style. I want to know, when I sit and listen to a pastor, Michael, I don't care if there's how many people there. It doesn't bother me. If it's 50 people or 5,000, I want to know that that pastor has been with God and that he has a message I need to hear. And that usually becomes evident within the first 30 or 40 seconds of the sermon. And by the way, since we're talking here about this, gentlemen, when you stand up to preach, get to the point. Yeah. Get to the point. Tell us, why did you call this meeting? Yeah. We want to. I have to tell a story here. I preached for pastor for 27 years, and then a variety of things happened. And for about 6 months, I didn't preach. What I mean is, I left the church. We moved down to Tupelo, Mississippi, and my wife was recovering from her cancer surgery. And for about 6 months, I didn't preach. After never not preaching on Sunday, essentially for
Right.
27 years, suddenly I was there going to church and sitting in the pew. Let me tell you something. Every preacher would be well served to spend a period of time just sitting in the pew. Because here's what I discovered, among other things. Sermons seem a whole lot longer in the pew than they do in the pulpit.
I believe that. Yes.
Oh, I was shocked at how quickly my mind would wander,
Yeah.
how easily it is for me, a preacher. I would
Yeah.
sit there listening to a man of God and suddenly start thinking about the football or where we're going. It's just it's shocking how fast that happens. And I remember one Sunday morning during that period, or along in there, my wife and I went to a church to hear a missionary preach. He announced, and in that particular church, they allowed you 30 minutes and only 30 minutes for the sermon because they had two services, and that's just the way they did things. And he announced his topic, or it was said in the bulletin, the glorious gospel of God's grace or something, from Romans 8:28 through 30. Listen, that's one of the greatest passages in all the Bible. And he got up, and I didn't know him. Okay, I did not know. I was in the balcony. It was obvious the church knew him. He'd been there before. He had a lot of friends there. They introduced him. He got up and started talking. He gave a report on his ministry. He talked about what God was doing. He talked about his wife. He talked about his kids. He greeted people in the audience, and he told a couple of stories about, you ought to come and see us and thank you for your prayers. I looked at my watch. 15 minutes had gone by. He had not said one word about the text, one of the greatest in all the Bible. And I wanted, though I didn't, I wanted to stand up and raise my hand and say, sir, why did you call this meeting? Was there anything particular on your mind you wanted us to know this morning? So I would say, if you want to improve your preaching, get started quickly.
Yeah.
Not 2 paragraphs in, not 5 minutes in, but let the very first words out of your mouth be the first word of the sermon. Haddon Robinson, one of my preaching professors at Dallas Seminary, 50 some years ago, used to say it this way: get up, grab them by the throat with your first sentence, and don't let them go until you're done. Well, it's not always, Michael, not always easy to do that. But in today's world, in today's world, look, with this world, the world of the cell phone, the world of Facebook and Twitter, we're also easily distracted. You don't have much time. If you have a message from God, get right to it.
Yeah, that's good. That's good. With that in mind, think about with us for a minute. How has your preaching changed? Whether it's preparation, whether it's the way that you do homiletics, or I guess I should say, has your preaching changed? And if it has, how would you see it having changed over the decades?
They taught me a good method for preaching at Dallas Seminary back in the 70s. I sort of do that. I wouldn't be exhibit A of what I learned to do back in the 70s, because you change and you grow. I remember for my first church was a blue collar congregation out on the West Coast, had about 2 people in the whole church with college degrees, or maybe 3, pipe fitters and welders and long haul truckers, just salt of the earth kind of people, and great, had so much fun out there. And I developed the habit out there most of the time of preaching without any notes at all. Just do my preparation and get up and preach. I went from there back to Dallas to pastor a church plant where we had 5 Dallas Seminary professors in the audience and about 30 Dallas Seminary students, plus, several hundred other people. And can I just be honest with you? It was a little bit intimidating, and I started writing out notes. And I didn't just write out notes. I got to where I would take 18 or 20 pages of handwritten notes. I went from one style of preaching to another, I think pretty heavy, pretty content heavy kind of, and I don't have too many recordings of those sermons, thank goodness. I think they were biblically accurate, but they were pretty heavy. So where am I now? 51 years in. I find myself simplifying all the time. We're the culture has gotten more biblically illiterate. People coming into our church with no knowledge of the Bible at all, none whatsoever. They know a whole lot more about Taylor Swift than do about King David and Abraham, right? So I find myself staying right on the biblical text, but trying to be very, very simple. In fact, what I do nowadays is I get up and tell them, from this text, I'm going to show you three things. Here's the question. I'm going to give you three answers. Here is answer number one. Here is answer number two. Here's answer number three. And I'm watching them at all the time. And I will often, though not every time, I will often say, okay, folks, come on back to me. No matter where you've been, come on back to me. I got about 3 minutes left.
Yeah.
Focus. Let's all land the plane together.
Yeah.
And they smile just like you did. They smile when I say that. It helps people know here is the part where it is all going to come together. So I'm finding that as I'm simplifying for today's generation, it is helping me communicate.
That's good. That's good. You know, one of the things that we talk a lot on these interviews and that I get to do with pastors and theologians is we talk about preaching, we talk about preparation, we talk about how to improve our knowledge and all those kind of things. I don't know that I've ever asked someone this question though, because preaching is there's both sides involved. There's the man behind the pulpit, and as you just mentioned, there's the congregation that's listening or not listening that we're trying to get back in. So maybe think through, if you were going to speak to church members who regularly, weekly are listening to preaching, hopefully engaging in learning. If you as a pastor, if you as a preacher could address church members and say, here's what you can do to help the preacher, what kind of things do you think the church member, the congregation can do to help that preacher in the role of preaching?
It is really hard to get away from the importance of prayer. There's so many other things, but Michael, it's hard to get away from that. And not just to pray for your pastor, but to tell him, Michael, God brought you to mind today.
Yeah.
I can't wait to hear what God's put on your heart.
Yeah.
That's thrilling when a church member says, I can't wait to hear, or let's say they know every pastor goes through trouble in the church. And any pastor who says he hasn't had trouble in his church is just not telling us the truth. Because, and I went through it. I went through times of great controversy in the churches I pastored. What a comfort for a church member knowing, maybe not knowing all the details,
right,
but knowing it's not easy for you right now.
Right.
You say, Pastor Ray, I know it's hard. I want you to know I'm praying for you. My buddy, Gary Olson, longtime elder of the church in Oak Park, football coach, a man's man. I best friend I ever had outside my family. And Gary had a great deep voice like a football coach should have. If he knew it was a hard time, and Gary would walk with me through that, he'd come and pray with me before the service. He'd put that hand on my shoulder and he would say three words, just bring it. Just bring it, Pastor.
Yeah.
Just bring it. Yeah. See, you can't help but smile when a great friend tells you, just bring it. Sometimes that's all you need to hear. You just need a friend to say, Pastor Ray, just bring it. Just bring what God has given you. Don't worry about anything else. So I think pray for your pastor and let him know. Oh, and also bring him food. Okay. Bring him some food.
So something practical. There we go.
That's right. Pray for him and then bring him food. I remember in the church at Oak Park, we were going through in early days an issue about the role of women in the church and male elders. Okay. It's a big deal. This was 30 years ago.
Yeah.
30 years ago. And Oh man, honestly, when we were in the heart of it, I didn't know if I was going to make it. There's a big church vote coming up, and if it had gone the other way, I wouldn't have stayed. I couldn't have stayed.
Yeah.
And I mean, it was roiling through this great congregation and people praying for me. It's funny how things come to your mind. My buddy Jim Warren was a primetime America host on the Moody Radio Network for 15, 20 years, maybe more. Great, great friend, now in heaven. And he and Gene, they weren't even members of the church, but they had served there before I got there. He became a friend, and he knew we were in the middle of it. And I still remember the day when we were in our house and a horn started honking outside our front door. And in the middle of controversy, you just don't know what that's going to be. You go to the
Are they
door.
marching 7 times around your house?
That's right. Waiting for the walls to fall down, right? And there was Jim and Gene next to him in a convertible. And he said, Ray, come here. He didn't even get out of the car. He said, Ray, come here. He said, I got something for you. He said, we were just at Baker Square having dinner, and they make these great pies. And we thought, we know Pastor Ray and Marlene are going through a hard time. They brought us not one, but 2 pies from Baker Square. Beautiful. Gave it to us. That simple, 30 years and more have passed. That simple gesture stays in my mind.
It's amazing.
Feed your pastor. Bring him some food. That's another practical way you can encourage him.
You know, it's interesting, isn't it, that as a pastor, part of what we do is we press on, no matter what. You got to be faithful. The next Sunday's coming, you press on. But the people have such a role to play in giving us the encouragement and strength to press on. Of course, our ultimate strength comes from the Lord, but the Lord uses His church. The Lord uses His people to strengthen and to help us. And I think church members underestimate how powerful they can be, how helpful they can be in both the work of prayer and some just practical things that you talked about to encourage the pastor.
Just tell your pastor, I don't know all that's happening, but I'm standing with you.
It's good. Yeah.
I'm standing with you.
Yeah.
And when the time comes to march forward into battle, I'm marching forward with you.
Yeah.
That'll give strength to his heart.
Yep.
Courage to his soul.
That's good. That's good. Well, thank you for spending some time with us, and grateful to learn from your wisdom and your experience. And again, as one who's been blessed by your ministry from a distance, thank you for walking through open doors the Lord has put in front of you. And thank you for being faithful. And even today, as I know that this is a harder season for you, thank you for being faithful to trust the Lord no matter what the Lord brings your way. Michael,
I love what you're doing there at First Baptist Mustang, and thank you for allowing me to be with you and to share. I'm a preacher like you, nothing better than talking about preaching. So thank you for this opportunity. It's been great to be with you.
Appreciate you.